Hello and welcome back to Kry Finance. I'm Kry, and this is the Kry Finance Show. If you don't like that, you can cry about it. But emotions don't belong in this market. So let's jump right in and leave the emotions behind. All right. So, our first thing we're going to start with today is the news headlines. And today there's a big story about President Biden seeking to deter an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear sites. But honestly, this is just noise. Biden hasn't taken really substantial action on anything ever. So you can rest assured this article is meaningless for the market. Moving on. Okay. So next, we're going to talk about the S&P 500, but I'll be brief because, well, nothing really happened today. If we look at today's chart really quick, you can see, I'm sure. Okay, here we go. You can see that this day was boring. Nothing happened. We had this big drop in the beginning of the day, but by the close, the S&P recovered all of those losses and it just closed flat, closed up a whopping 0.01%. So that's exciting. But we should keep in mind that tomorrow we do have that jobs number coming out. We'll get to that a little bit later. And we do still have this median band that we talked about yesterday about how if we do see this Heiken Ashi candle pattern continue, that we will at some point, or it's very likely that at some point we will retest this median band, which is at 56.37. So that's also the top of this level here, the top of this level here. It would make a lot of sense for us to retest that level. Now, could go the other way, but we do have this Heiken Ashi trying to sell us a story here. So we will see what happens tomorrow. Okay. Next up, let's talk about JPMorgan. The stock has been pretty boring, but let's see here. Got something interesting happening on the technical side, and it's this median line again, similar to the S&P, but the S&P hasn't gotten there yet. JP Morgan has on the weekly time frame. Now, if this median band breaks here, we could see JP Morgan start to test this 192 level here because there's really nothing else. If we're just looking at Bollinger Bands, there's really nothing else between these two levels. Now we could see this level, this 200 level test. I believe it was like 268 cents, 48 cents, something like that. But really, if we want to be convinced that this has bottomed, it would be this 192 level. Now, if we break through that, we will be looking at, I got to reload this again. We will be looking at the level of, to figure out how to zoom in a little bit better on this chart here. Okay, so we will be looking at this 171.44 level if we see a Heiken Ashi downside trend on the monthly, but that will take some time to develop. We'll have to see how October closes out, but this is interesting to keep in mind because we do have the election season that is happening right now. And once that election takes place, I'm sure that some form of hell will break loose and we will see volatility in this market. Now, moving on, we have Boeing. So Boeing is considering issuing a $10 billion share offering, which is really not good because it is just dilution, plain and simple. With Boeing's market cap sitting around $100 billion, I am expecting a move of about 10% to the downside. Shareholders can't be thrilled about this mess, and I would not be surprised to see some selling pressure in the weeks ahead. Now, here is the chart for Boeing. If you want to see what a little bit of that hell we were talking about just a minute ago looks like. So if Boeing was to see a 10% move to the downside, it would be about $15, which would take it down to roughly like 137 or so. Now, 137, let's just see if that lines up with anything. It seems to line up with back here, all the way back in 2014 to 2016 when we were sideways there. So there's a pretty good chance that that happens. But again, we always have to keep our crystal ball in our back pocket in case these things don't pan out. Okay, moving on to IONQ. Now, this is a quantum computing company, excuse me. And this one is just a lot more exciting because let's face it, everything in tech right now is boring and dull. It's the same. This is a screen and you can have pictures and videos on it. And, you know, quantum computing allows for a lot of other stuff to be done with tech. Now, what those other things are, I don't know because I'm not a computer guy, but somebody is, and somebody's excited about it. We saw IonQ go up about 10% today. So that is very exciting news for that company. Um, but yeah, this is like the next big thing, quantum computing. So we need to keep an eye on this. And as traditional tech loses steam, people are going to be looking for the next big thing. So I think quantum computing is exactly that. Now, speaking of growth stocks, let's get this out of the way. We had Toyota today announce that they were investing $500 million more into Joby Aviation. Now, Joby Aviation responded by rallying 25% on the day, give or take a percent or two. Now, remember, Toyota has invested in Joby before, but despite the initial hype, the stock has cooled down since. So, still with another injection of capital, it'll be interesting to see how Joby trades going forward, but we can't really expect too much because the last time this thing got hyped on a Toyota investment, it went to this $11 mark here and then slowly but surely went back down to where we are today. So, we need to just remember that this is a growth stock, but there's still some volatility, and we're also in this election season. We've got monetary policy, but if you're looking for a growth name, this is definitely something that you could consider. Now, this is not, we want to keep in mind, this is all not investment advice. This is just interesting stuff, and we're talking about it. What you do, how you buy or how you sell is entirely up to you, and everything that you hear today is just interesting. Okay. So, in other news, we had the vice presidential debate last night. And as you can see, uh, everything went normal today, just the same thing as yesterday. Life goes on. Nothing material was said at this debate. So, we can just skip that altogether. It's just nonsense. I read a good amount of this article, and I'll never get those few minutes of my life back. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about here is what we talked about in the beginning, which is we've got that jobless claims number coming out tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. We also have the S&P Global Services PMI that's going to hit at 9:45, but the real story is going to be this jobless claims number. Now, if these jobless claims come in higher than expected, we should see the market do well, even though it's saying that there's more jobless claims, because a higher number should anyway translate to the Fed having justification to continue cutting rates in large format. If this jobless claims number comes in fairly low or just lower than expected, the market will respond in kind, because the Fed claims that they are data dependent and that they want to support the jobs market. But if the jobs market does not need to be supported, the cuts do not need to be as severe. And this market wants cuts. And so if the number is lower, this market will go down. That is at least the expectation. Now, this market can do whatever it wants, but that is kind of what I am expecting. because we've got the S&P doing what it's doing here and kind of just yearning for this median band with the Heiken Ashi trending. Now, if tomorrow the market rips and just totally negates this whole thing, I really don't see it going over this 57.64 mark. But anything can happen. But I do think that this is important to note that I would say about 57.60, 57.65 is probably going to be as high as it goes. If it's to go up and if it's to go down, we will most likely, I don't want to say definitely because that's too sure, but there's a very high probability that this thing is going to go down to 56.37 or even lower, and then maybe close at that median band. But we'll see what happens. But this jobs report is super important, so we cannot miss that tomorrow. Now, before we wrap up, here is today's closing quote. The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. Now, everyone has heard this one, so that's why we're going to start it out with that, doing closing quotes, because something that we're all familiar with, that you have to be patient in these markets to make a profit. You also have to be quick, but today the quote says we should be patient. So that's it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow on Kry Finance. Until then, stay sharp, stay focused, keep those emotions out of the market. I'm Kry. Have a good night.